Thank you, everybody, for joining me today for another episode of Your Double podcast by Find My Parent. Last week, you'll see that I interviewed a father named John who had his children abducted to South Korea. And after years of doing advocacy work and a treadmill protest, he was able to reunite with his children who are living with him today in San Francisco. This week, I am honored to be here with Find My Parent board member, Patricia, who would love to share her story with you about her children's abduction from the US to Saudi Arabia. Before I hand it over to Patricia, I would like you to know that we would love to share more stories, your stories via our podcast, whether you've had family members go missing for any reason, adoption, abduction, human trafficking, migration, war, conflict, etc., whether you've been reunited or not. And so starting this month, we're holding a monthly raffle. If you donate $10 via our website, findmyparent.org, you'll be entered in for that raffle. And each month we'll choose one person to be featured on our growing podcast so you can get your story out to the world and help other parents and family members who are going through similar circumstances. So now I'll pass it over to Patricia to tell us a bit about herself and her story. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Hi, Danielle. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak about what happened and my experience with child abduction. By the way, before I get started, I want to say that sounds like a really great idea, giving a lottery or whatever for people to tell their story, because I would have died to be able to tell my story. The problem when my children were kidnapped from me, they were kidnapped in 1989 from me living in the United States and taken to Saudi Arabia, to Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, where they were held for 14 years. There was no internet. There was no emailing. There was really nothing at the time. And I had no way of getting my message out. I had no way of letting people that knew them, that knew me, that might have helped me to get any message to them unless I wrote a letter. And that's what I did. I wrote letters and letters to everyone in my children's family, everyone in the neighborhood and the community in Saudi Arabia, women that I knew, and I didn't get one response. Not one person answered me. So having this idea about having a podcast and allowing people to share their story is brilliant. I think that's a great thing. Anyway, so my story started in the 1980s when I met my husband. His name was Abdul Rahman Abar, and he was a student at Boston University. He came from Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. I was a young 17-year-old, my first year in college, away from my family, and he drove up in a car. I was at a party, and he drove up in this fancy sports car, and oh my God, I'd never seen an Arab in my life. I'd never met anyone who was so worldly. He had been raised and schooled in England. He had a British accent. He was very rich. He was very handsome. He was very sophisticated, much more sophisticated than the freshmen in college that I knew. You know, boys of that age, they were boys, and they hardly could even afford to take you to a hamburger joint for a hamburger. Oh, I'm sorry. The dog's somebody. I'm sorry. She won't bother us. Anyway, and so when I saw this man, this handsome man, he was only 2 years older than me, but it seemed like, oh my God, he was like a man. And he drove up with this car, and he obviously liked me too. And he pulled over, and my friends knew him, and we were introduced, and I was like falling over myself, like how exotic, how exciting, how unbelievable. It was around the time of the oil embargo. And so we heard these mysterious descriptions of these Saudi Arabians wearing their white robes. And here this guy was so sexy. And so I fell in love. And he also fell in love with me. And it's not like we didn't know each other. We dated for many years. I think about 6 years before we got married, because he was older. He graduated. I finished college. I went to grad school. And then we finally did get married. I went to Saudi Arabia. Um, it was shockingly different than where I had grown up, but I was a believer that love prevails and love is the most important thing. And so even though, in spite of the fact that it was a very primitive country at the time, I know it's changed, but at that time it was really primitive. There were no paved roads in Jeddah. There were no phone lines, maybe one phone line to like a whole family. There was nothing, no way to communicate with the outside world, and very, 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 very religious. They have a very strict sect of the Islamic religion, Wahhabism. It's one of the most strictest of the sects of Islam. And so, not only did the family follow the religion, but they did it like on steroids. So that didn't stop me. None of that stopped me. And we got married. I actually wrote a book about the experience that describes Jeddah and life in Saudi and all of that. And I can get into that later, but it was a very, very amazing experience. And it didn't dampen my love for him. I still loved him and I loved the family and I was happy. It was a little scary, but I could deal with it. Um, Little by little, I think both of us we felt like we were stagnating in Saudi Arabia. And my husband at the time decided, which was fantastic, to go to law school at Georgetown University. And so we were able to leave Saudi Arabia and live in the West. And we lived there for many years. He went to law school, he got a job in a law firm in DC, then he changed his mind, he learned how to play polo. We went all over the world, with the polo crowd and with the jet set crowd, and it was a crazy life. We had two children when we were in the United States, my son Kareem and my daughter Sultana. I gave birth to them in Washington, D.C. And little by little, everything seemed very happy, but little by little, our marriage deteriorated, sadly. It got to the point where I caught him with several women, and he said to me, I'm Saudi and I can marry four women. And I was like looking at him with his good looking, with the British accent, fancy clothes, sports car, all his life, living in the West. And I said, well, what do you mean you're Saudi and you can marry four women? I guess you can by law, but not with me as your wife. When did we ever discuss this? It would be like you're marrying someone, and suddenly, after you're married for a few years, you have kids. They say, "Oh, we're going to go live on the moon." I've made our reservations. Like, wait a minute. So I I realized he was very serious. That he intended to cheat and to have infidelity, and I couldn't keep up with it. And eventually we ended up getting married. So it's a little personal, but I wanted to share our reasons. It wasn't his family that was bad to me. It wasn't the country it got me down a little, but not enough to divorce. It was him personally, the way he behaved in our marriage that made me want a divorce. And we did get divorced. We were living in Florida and Washington, D.C. at the time. He was playing polo. He was, not really working. His family didn't really care. They just sent money. And because I wanted a divorce, he started threatening me. Well, you're not going to keep your children. I'm gonna keep them. And you know, in the court, I told them he's threatening me. And they said, well, he lives here. Where would he take them? And I said, no, maybe he'll take them back to Saudi Arabia. Well, he hasn't been there in many years. Why would he do that? Anyway, long story short, the court of our country, the Maryland Divorce Court, gave this man, my ex-husband, unsupervised visitation of both of our children. I fought for 1 year. I fought with everything I had. I sold everything, all my jewelry, my house. I sold my house. I had to pay lawyers, international lawyers, like in the two countries. I had to pay, State Department lawyers. There was no way that I could get anybody to really be on my side. And that's one of the first things that I want to point out is that I feel like this country has to get their act together. The United States has to get their act together with figuring out how to have parental laws, parental custody laws sort of brought into alignment between countries, because it was obscene how there was no one that could help me, no entity that could help me, nobody cared to help me. But anyway, my husband got the unsupervised visitation of the two children in Florida, and within one day he jumped on a plane, left the country with them, and I did not see my two children for 14 years. At that point, I mean, I I was I can't even, I'm sure any parent that's lost their children would understand, but there are not many of us. And everywhere I went, people were trying to give me this cheesy advice like, oh, you don't want them anyway, or oh, they're better off there, or oh, he's not going to keep them very long. Nobody, unless you've been in this very unusual situation, there's almost no one you can speak to. Nobody really sympathizes. Why did you marry him? We told you not to. What were you thinking? You blame yourself. It was so unreal. And I wandered around for 14 years. Like at the beginning, I was a basket case. I didn't even know what to do. I was trying everything. And then little by little, I thought, oh my God, if I don't get a grip on myself, I'll end up, if they ever come back to me, I'll be like a degenerate or something. I won't have work. I won't have, maybe I'll go insane. I mean, I was really on the verge of like, I didn't know. It was terrible. So thank God I pulled myself together and I just said, I have to put this behind me. I kept fighting, obviously. I kept trying and I kept making attempts. I tried everything I could personally, writing to people, you know, trying to call the few phone numbers that I knew, calling people that I knew in this country that knew him, eh, telling people that knew him, couldn't you please speak to him? Nothing worked. And so for 14 years, there was no contact with my children, no telephone calls. I did not see any pictures. I didn't know what they looked like. And obviously no visits. So there was zero contact. The only way I did get my children back was not through diplomacy or lawfare or anything like that. It was a lucky break. I was sitting in my office working one day after 14 years, and I admit, I think I had just given up on them. I married another man. I had another child. I had my job as an interior designer, and I just sort of focused on the life I had created. And I get this phone call from one of my ex-husband's good friends, a Lebanese guy that he'd gone to law school with. And he told me, your son is in the United States at high school. He's graduating high school in the United States. And I said, what do you mean? How could Kareem be here? He says, I don't know, but I heard his father saying something about it, and I don't know what school it is. I know your son is riding horses at this boarding school in America, and maybe he's playing polo. So I said, okay, at least that's something. Thank you. I hired a private investigator, and we looked through every single boarding school in America that had horse riding and polo as part of their program. And we ended up with 8 of them, private schools, and whatever it is the private investigators do, within 2 weeks, they came back to me and they said, your son is in Indiana at Culver Academy, He's a senior. This was in May. He's graduating next week. And we found that he's enrolled in Boston University in the fall. So at that moment, oh my God, like it would be it was the most happy but shocking and challenging thing that ever happened yet, that had yet happened. Here I now know my son is in America. I'm thinking, why didn't he try to contact me? Then I'm realizing, how does he even know? I changed my name. I live in New York. I used to live in Florida and Washington. He doesn't know. There's still wasn't really an internet. I wasn't on the internet. Now, of course, if you Google my name, Patricia Bonis, you can know everything about me. But in those days, it was, I think, 2001, right after 9/11. And first I thought, well, my son isn't even trying to find me. Maybe he doesn't want to be found. But then I thought, no, no, calm down. I'm the parent. And then I thought, wow, he's got a week left of school. He's a senior. He's going probably to his prom. Probably nobody knows the story that he has an American mother that hasn't seen him. They live in dorms. I thought this is going to be the most challenging. They might not even let me in the school. There might be military guards at the gate. It's a military school. So I said, okay, I got to wait, got to figure this out. I will go in September when he starts at Boston University. I know Boston. I went to Wellesley. His dad went to Boston. I know the place. I know the lay of the land. So I waited until September, 1 week after his school started, and I drove to Boston. And I found his apartment. The private investigator gave me the information. And there I was standing in front of his apartment building at like noon on a Wednesday in September. And I was very lucky. I fiddled with the keypad to try to get his name and get his apartment number or whatever. And suddenly one of the like a concierge came out and asked me what I'm doing. And I said, well, I'm looking for Kareem Abbar. And he said, oh, he moved in last week. We haven't had a chance to put his name on the touchpad. I'll take you up. And suddenly he took me up. And on the fifth floor, I still remember ding, ding as we're going up, ding, every floor. And then there I am walking down the floor. I felt like it was like out of body experience. And we knocked on the door. The concierge was still there. And my son opened. And there I was looking at my 18-year-old son that I hadn't seen since he was 4. And he didn't know who I was. He smiled and he said, who are you? And I just said, I'm your mother. And he actually took a step back. And I'm like, no, 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 please. Just let me come in. Don't close the door, please. And he hesitated for a moment. And then he said, okay, okay. And he kind of moved his hand, like waved it, like, come in. And I walked in and shut the door behind me. And we started to get to know each other. It was very, very tough going at first. I felt like, how do you even know what to say? I felt like everything I did, he was looking at through like a microscope. I'm a lot more animated than his Arabic family. I know them very well. They just sit there like this and they talk like this. This is the way they are. And here I am, like waving my hands, and I gave him a hug. I was so excited. I calm down, it was like, I thought it was a disastrous first meeting, but actually it was successful because after speaking with him for about an hour, he agreed to have dinner with me that night. And I started getting to know my son. I went back to Boston every month for the next 4 years, spent one evening with him, dinner. And then when he was ready to like go and go out with his friends, I said, no problem. Went to the hotel, went to sleep, woke up in the morning and drove back to New York where I lived. And he, little by little, also, he would come, he came and visited me in my home. I told him I'm remarried. He was actually happy that I had remarried. I don't think he would have been comfortable with just a woman like on her own living. He couldn't probably understand who I was. I think he liked the fact that I had actually married someone. I had a daughter. I was like in his like a normal woman, like the type of women that they're used to, a wife, a homemaker. I had my career. So in a way, I thought, okay, he feels comfortable with my choices, which is a good thing. And by the way, when I wrote that book about the kidnapping and the experience living in Saudi Arabia and all, I asked him, are you okay if I write this book? And he said, yes, it's your story to tell. So I'm very lucky in a sense that even though my son was brought and my daughter were brought to a very, very different culture, I guess they could accept the life that I led and the person I became and who I am today and my choices. So I'm very lucky because it might not have worked out that way. In fact, I will tell you that anything I did, like when I was going to get remarried, I wasn't sitting there wondering, am I in love with this man? Do I want to remarry? All I could think of was, what will Kareem and Sultana do if we ever see each other again and I'm married to a different man? I mean, I had another child. The minute, obviously, I wanted a child. I loved having children. I lost two children. So I went forward and I had another. And then I felt really guilty, like as if I had betrayed them. I betrayed the first two children. And then, you're thinking, well, how will they get along? Will they get along? Will they ever meet each other? Do I tell my daughter, Amanda, about the two other children? It's like layer upon layer upon layer of complications. And it just never ended. It's still, in many ways, it's still not perfect. But anyway, I also got to finally meet my daughter, who was a year younger, and she decided to come to Wellesley, to Boston, to college. That was my alma mater. And she applied and was accepted. And her dad had already found out that Kareem was seeing me. So he sort of sighed and said, well, she's a silly woman, but do whatever you want. And so he sort of gave them this tacit permission to speak to me. And so Sultana came to Wellesley and she was very happy to start a relationship with me. It was amazing. When I first saw her, we picked her up at the airport when she flew in, my daughter and I brought my little fluffy dog just to break the tension. And I saw her and she reminded me of me. It, I just I wanted to cry, but I knew I couldn't because that would have made everyone uncomfortable and they might have cried. My other daughter, you have to think of them sometimes before you can, just express yourself. So Sultana and I, immediately got along really well. She was raised without a mom and she was happy to have one, excited, and she immediately like trusted me. It's their culture, I think. She trusted Amanda. They consider my third child, Amanda, to be their sibling. My father-in-law, my ex-father-in-law, heard that I had had another baby, and he came to New York, and he actually met Amanda, and he calls her his grandchild, and he calls me his daughter, and that's another thing that it's pretty shocking that the family of my ex-husband do not consider that they did something wrong. In their culture, it's okay. They don't, I mean, maybe deep down inside, I don't know, they never admitted it. They felt like this is the way things have to be. It's a very strict religion in their country, and you have really unmovable laws. They just do what has to be done, and you don't question it. I mean, I heard of stories when I lived there where there would be a daughter who disobeyed her father, did something crazy, like, he found her in bed with a guy that she wasn't married to, or something crazy like that, or married someone that without his permission. They executed her, and nobody speaks about it. Like it's just so part. The other thing is, I said nobody understands in this country what you're going through. Well, they don't understand it in the foreign country either, because they have different ways of doing things and different values. So if they felt that bad about what they were doing, like withholding a child, or even anywhere, if it's being withheld in America, if they felt so bad and guilty, they'd probably lighten up and allow the alienated parent to be with the children. It's unbelievable how these things just keep happening and happening. And I mean, my case was an extreme case, that it was a crazy different culture than New York in the United States. And we're talking Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, New York, USA. And that's as part of the two extremes. But there are people that I've heard their stories, that it was like they're holding the child in like someplace in Spain, or I don't know. I don't know. But obviously there are reasons. The families, they have their way of looking at things, and who knows? It's so personal for each case. So it's so upsetting. Um, so anyway, so how did the relationships evolve after we met after the children got to meet me and we got to know each other? My ex-husband, which is, who was in Saudi Arabia, was not happy, and he was a little nasty with the kids for a while, maybe not sending them money. He didn't want them to stay in America after the last day of school. He forced them to fly back immediately. He'd send them an air ticket the next morning after they were done at school. Never he did not want them to visit my home in New York. They didn't tell him they visited. They were afraid. Um, there was always that tension, and I think there still is. There still is a tension, and it's been since 2001 that I've actually been seeing my children. So that's a long time. Um, the family was very relieved. The actual, aunts and uncles, cousins, they were relieved. And my son had a wedding where he married a Saudi girl a few years ago. He had the wedding in Dubai, and he asked me to come. And I said, okay, wait a minute. I don't want to take away the attention from you and your bride. Are you sure this is a smart thing to do, to invite me? And what's your family going to say? He goes, oh no, that's ridiculous. I want you. And I'm like, okay, I will do it. Okay, so how do I come? Do I come alone? I'll be happy to. Do I bring Amanda? I'll take her out of school. She was in college. She can come for a few days. Do you want me to bring my mom? Grandma Terry? I'll drag her, I'll bring her with me. Whatever you say. He said, no, bring your husband. And I was like, why? Isn't your dad gonna I mean, what about no, that's ridiculous. Well, I went there with my husband, Mitchell. And when my ex-husband saw that I came with him, he was threatening that he was going to have me arrested and thrown in jail. He knows the Sultan of whoever it is in Dubai. I don't know who's the ruler of Dubai. a prince or a sultan or an Oman, or I don't know what he is, but that person is my ex-husband's friend. And they were I was threatened that we would be arrested. So my husband and I got on a plane the next morning and we hightailed it out of there. And I'm glad we did, because I wouldn't want to have another story to tell. So, but I was happy to see, but okay, so the point is, everyone in the family came over to me at the wedding. The aunts, the uncles, the in-laws, the cousins, they were all greeting me, kissing me, tears in their eyes, saying how happy they were to see me with Kareem and Sultana, how beautiful Sultana is, how wonderful Kareem is, how smart he is, how handsome he is, and it was all because of me. And I realized that they didn't answer my letters because they felt that what had happened was correct. I think they were afraid to go against the family, afraid to do anything that could get them in trouble. And so, it's okay. So another topic that one can talk about when you've had your children abducted is not only how does the family feel about it, but are they able to help? Or maybe they're completely paralyzed. They don't know what to do. They're afraid. They're, they don't, especially women in many of the cultures in, outside of the United States, they're afraid to go against their family. They're afraid to go against their husband. They're afraid. A lot of them don't even work, don't have their own independence. There's nothing. They can't help themselves oftentimes. How are they going to help me? And so that's, in fact, that was what I explored in my book was culture clash, um, international child abduction, and how there are not proper coordination of the laws between countries. I mean, countries trade with each other. They have set rules about movement of money and movement of goods, and they somehow come to these agreements. But for some reason, when it has to do with family law, um, marriage, divorce, children, it seems like every country has their own way of doing things, and they just refuse to coordinate. And that's one of the reasons why, when I was put in contact with Find My Parent, I thought, oh my God, what a difference. What a difference it would have made if this app had existed. I I could have, my son, who was in America for 3 years at high school, could have put in what little he knew. He knew my maiden name. He knew my family, my parents, Grandma Terry. Like, he could have put in things like where we lived in Washington, D.C., whatever dopey information he still had, Wellesley College, and he could have found me. And he actually, when I said to him after a few years of getting to reunited, I said to him, Kareem, did you ever wonder where I was and try to find me? And he said, I tried, but I just couldn't figure it out. How would I find me? Didn't have your address. He goes, I was just 4 years old. And Sultana didn't even remember me. And maybe that's better. Maybe that's better for her, because I think he suffered more. But if Find My Parent had existed, I could have found him in boarding school when he was in ninth grade or 10th grade. He went in 10th, 11th, and 12th. I could have found him. I could have kept looking and searching, and I knew their name, I knew the family. I could have pinpointed him, and I could have found that. So that, to me, I think, I always say, you really can't rely on governments many times to do these special things for people with unusual situations. And that's the thing about Find My Parent. It's so incredible. Um, and it's funny how I came to be involved with Find My Parent, actually. Um, I was already reunited with my children, and my daughter Amanda well, she loves Japan. I don't know why. We have nothing to do with Japan, but when she was around 4 years old, she wanted to have kimonos and she loved Japanese cartoons, and she actually took it upon herself to learn Japanese. She's completely fluent, and I mean really fluent. And she almost went and got a job in Tokyo. And Amanda was um, she was she grew up thinking she was an only child because it was way too heavy of a subject to bring up, not my and her dad wasn't that thrilled that I had this story. So he was not comfortable, but with it, and I didn't want to get Amanda into it. It was just too much for her. So I waited until I finally saw Kareem, and then I thought, okay, now I have to tell Amanda. And I told my husband, I'm gonna tell Amanda. I can't, like, this is too big. It's too big of a thing happening. So here I go. I've got this only child, spoiled and beloved, and thinks, mommy and daddy, and she owns us. We're her mommy and daddy. And then I tell her, Amanda, you have a brother and sister in Saudi Arabia. And she's like, it was so hard for her to fathom. She looked all excited. She goes, I have a brother and sister. Saudi Arabia, what's that? I said, oh, that's a faraway country. They live there. So she was like, oh, that's wow, that's interesting. Why don't I ever see them? I said, because it's very far away, but you will one day. So she goes to school the next day and tells her friend, I have a brother and sister. She doesn't remember Saudi Arabia. She says, I have a brother and sister in Paradise Island. We had just been to Paradise Island on vacation in the Caribbean. She goes, they live in Paradise Island. So her friend goes home and tells the mom. And then the mom calls me the next day and says, Patricia, a very strange thing happened in school. Your daughter, man, is going around telling people she has a brother and sister in Paradise Island. I said, oh God, I hadn't even told this lady that in fact, I didn't tell anyone that I had two kidnapped children. I just couldn't deal with it. I couldn't deal with the criticism, the shock, the dopey questions, the stupid suggestions. Oh, you should go there. Oh, you should demand this. Oh, you should go to the State Department, like as if I hadn't already tried all those things. So I never told anybody after a while that I had lost these children. And so my friend said, what do you mean? I said, well, I have two children from my first marriage. They were kidnapped and they're in Saudi Arabia. And they just now, I've gotten back in touch with them. And everybody was like flabbergasted as I told them, even my ex-husband, some of his family members, I never told them. Well, anyway, all of a sudden, about a month later, my daughter Amanda comes to me and she's like, so I have a brother and sister in she remembered now, Saudi Arabia, but who is their mother? I said, I am. That really bothered her. I I don't think it was the idea of sharing a mother that bothered her. It was like, why aren't you with them? And she was like, what do you mean? I said, they were kidnapped. And then her next thing was, is my daddy going to kidnap me? I mean, this is how unfathomable it was for her, that she couldn't even imagine that I was their mother. And what a father kidnapped? Like, so that's another theme that my book dealt with, and that I feel I have to speak about, is that people, it's like so shocking. Nobody wants to believe this happened. Nobody can help you. Nobody can understand. They don't understand how hard it is to get to rebuild the relationship. I can't even tell you, life isn't easy, everybody has, we all have to work and find people we love and have meaning in our lives and whatever we do, keep our health, elderly parents, there's a million things that life hits us with. But if you are involved with the abduction of a child, it's another whole world of confusing problems, issues, and things that nobody can relate to. Honestly, very few people can relate to this. And it makes you feel like you're really alone. And I have to tell you, when I wrote Jeddah Bride, my book, it took me a few years to write it. I only could do chapter by chapter, and I had to remember a lot of painful memories. And it wasn't easy to write, but I really felt like I have to tell this story. I have to let people know things like what happens when you go into a different culture, what happens when you are living in a foreign land and they're very different than you, what happens when you have differences in your concept of what marriage is about, fidelity and marrying one spouse or marrying four spouses, and can you work? Maybe the husband doesn't want you to work. There's a lot of things that have to be ironed out when you marry someone that's not in the same culture that you are. And then when the marriage gets disrupted, now not only do you have to deal with all their, like some marriage, like some cultures, don't think of anything if you throw the spouse away, you just get rid of them. You don't even, and the idea of who gets the children. I mean, it's so complicated. And I wanted to talk about all these subjects. I'm by no means an expert. I'm just telling you my experience and how much I feel for people. I mean, the weird thing is, I'm an interior designer. I had an employee. She was my assistant. Her name was Amanda Lee. And she knew about my kids being kidnapped. She was with me, working with me before I got them back. And she was there in the office when I got the notification that Kareem was in the United States. And the weirdest thing happened. She actually left the job because she got engaged and got married to a Canadian. He was an architect. It was great. She's a designer. He's an architect. Sounds great. She goes to live in Vancouver with him. And his mother, I'm sorry about that. His mother was a native Canadian, an Inuit. Okay, they got married, they had two children, two boy twins, and then the husband started drinking and beating her up and doing crazy things. And she took her two children and left and came back to New York. And she actually called me. She said, "Can I work for you again?" I said, "Well, of course." Anyway, what happened was the Canadian government took those two children away from her because they are one quarter Inuit. And there's a law in Canada. I don't know if it's still the law today, but this woman, this American girl from New York, lost her two sons. They had to be taken to Canada, and she did not see them for the first few years. And I testified for her in court. She did not see them. And finally, she won the right to see them for 2 weeks a year. And she had to go there to see them. And little by little, she kept fighting. She kept fighting. At least I think it happened after there was internet and so she was able to call them. And finally, I think they just turned 21 this summer or this fall or this winter, whatever it was. And she was sending me pictures. She took them on a trip to Europe and they were everywhere and hugging. And I was like, oh my God, that's like a 20-something year saga. And these two boys are now 21. So how strange that this would happen between a Canadian and an American. So you just, it's more common than people realize. And I think some people feel like it's a stigma. Some people don't have the emotional capacity to even talk about it because it's hurting them so much. And nobody knows. I mean, I went to therapy years and years. I don't think my therapist knew how to help me. I don't think, I think the first time that I was able to really get something beneficial from all that therapy was when I was telling the therapist that I told Amanda about her two children. That she was able to kind of advise me on. And when I said I'm going up to see my son, that she was able to advise me on. But telling me how to deal with something like this, that not seeing my children, not being able to talk to them, how do you help someone? So it was a very lonely, terrifying, isolating, horrible experience that I actually lived through. And I think I can attribute, I came out okay at the end. I think my kids are okay. Um, all those lost years, you know what? You can't think about it. You can't look back. Um, and I think that I would advise anybody that's going through this right now to just keep looking forward, and keep imagining the day you're going to be reunited with your child and what you're going to be doing and what you're going to look like and what you're going to say to them and how the relationship is going to proceed. And just keep looking forward and focus on that. And that's kind of what I did. So that's my story.
That, that's great advice because obviously, yeah, a lot of parents feel desperation, especially when you're talking years and years fighting for their kids. Patricia, tell us, you mentioned your book a couple of times. Tell us a bit more about your book and if listeners are interested in reading it, where they can get access to the book as well.
Okay, great. So Jeddah Bride, Jeddah, Jeddah, the city in Saudi Arabia, Bride. So people ask me, why did you choose that title? And I went through a lot of different titles, stolen, taken, never seen again, like all these dramatic titles. But then I thought, no, I like, I want to express the feeling of helplessness and the feeling of like, for some reason, Jeddah Bride resonated because I'm the Jeddah Bride. I am the woman, the bride, who had to live by Jeddah's rules. Jeddah Bride, a, a woman that can't really do much to help herself, has to just kind of be anonymous. You know, it it just resonated. It had a sadness to it, but not blatant sadness. It was just very subtly sad. And I feel like it represented my story. So that's why I chose the title. Um, I started writing the book after I got home from that first day of meeting my son. I went to dinner with him, I went to sleep in the hotel, and then I got up the next morning very early and I drove back to New York, planning to return in a month. And on the way home, my mind was racing. Uh, it it turned out so much better than it could have. And I was so happy and I was so exhilarated. I just couldn't even believe that my whole life switched from like dark to light. And suddenly I wanted to write about it. I decided that day was going to be my first chapter. And so that is the first chapter of Jeddah Bride. Step by step, how I woke up in the morning, and in the end, I was driving back and I'd seen my son. And little by little, I thought, well, what's another chapter that I should write about? And I wrote about the next chapter I chose to write about was the experience we had in the airport when I found out my kids were taken from Florida. The nanny called and said the children did not come back home. Um, they were with their father. He told me not to come. I was like, why did you not go insist? She goes, I couldn't insist. he took them. And they didn't return, and I thought they're gone. Maybe they're not out of the country yet. It was only a few hours. And so we rushed to Kennedy Airport. We had found a few airline tickets in his drawer for that day and the next day. And we thought I would just sit there at the airport and stake it out. And maybe I could stop him. And I sat there with my mom and my sister and my uncle, and I actually got two FBI agents involved, and he didn't show up. I guess he bought a lot of different tickets, and he ended up going on the one that was convenient for him, and he'd already left. So I thought, okay, I wrote that chapter, and that became one of the chapters in the middle. And then little by little, I recreated how we met and what it was like living in Saudi Arabia, a lot of interesting culture about Saudi Arabia, a lot of stories of things I saw and people I met. And then, more stories about when we were married and where how we traveled around. It's a book that has a little of everything in it. And I finally wrapped it up in the end with the epilogue where I had a reuniting with his family, with the family. And that was the hardest chapter to write, but it's like forgiveness, just having to know that you can't carry anger and against people for your whole life. It's too heavy of a burden, at least for me. And I finished, the book on a positive note because we do have the future. And so if anyone wants to read Jeddah Bride, which I'd be very honored if you were interested, it's available on Amazon. It's in book, hard copy, paperback, Kindle, and my daughter Amanda, who's an actress, voiced the Audible book. So you can listen to it while you drive. And I'm proud of that. People want me to write a sequel, and I'm thinking about starting it this summer. The book just came out last year, so this would be my second book. And I'm a little excited about that. Um I'm going to explore the aspects that of all these podcasts and interviews I've had for the book. There have been a lot of questions that people asked that were interesting, and I'd like to really discuss things that I hadn't touched upon in the first book. So that's where I'm at right now.
Great. No, I think it's very beautiful that you were able to get it all on paper, share your story with others, give them some hope, inspiration. So we'll definitely put the link to the book in the comment section, the description section of this podcast. And if anybody has any guests or specific types of stories they would like to hear on our podcast, feel free to put that in the comments. We'll do our best to bring on guests, that can address the topics you're interested in. Again, at Find My Parent, we're addressing all types of family separation. So many of you may know that we were born out of a story also of parental abduction. My co-founder experienced something very similar to Patricia. But our technology was built and can and should be used by any person that's ever been separated from a family member. So that could be somebody who's adopted and would like to find their biological parents, families that were separated during natural disasters, conflicts, human trafficking, you name it. So we're happy to also bring on people that can talk about these topics as well. So again, if you have any suggestions for guest topics you'd like to see on Your Double podcast, feel free to drop those in the comments. Don't forget to participate in our raffle if you'd like to be a guest on our podcast by just going to our website and clicking the donate button and donating $10 or more. 100% of all donations always goes towards our programmatic costs. My parents' team works 100% pro bono. Our executive team works pro bono. And it'll give you a chance to basically tell your story to the world via our podcast. So thank you so much for joining us today, Patricia. I've heard your story multiple times and every time it gives me goosebumps and I really enjoy listening to it. So I appreciate
Thank
that.
you. It gives me goosebumps too. But thank you so much for letting me be on this podcast. And we're going to work very hard for Find My Parent. We're going to make a lot of miracles